Good morning, and welcome to the 2025 Louisiana Energy Outlook Webcast, presented by 1012 Industry Report and Baton Rouge Business Report. I'm Penny Font, Chief Content Officer for both publications. Over the next 45 minutes, an expert panel will be exploring the key issues and trends facing a Louisiana energy industry that's in the midst of fundamental transformation. This webcast would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors, the Alliance Safety Council and Bradley Murchison Law. Before we begin our panel discussion, please enjoy these messages from our sponsors.
Build a safe, high-performing workforce with Alliance Safety Council, your partner in creating, delivering, and managing training that meets compliance standards in an ever-changing world. Every year, we help over 240,000 workers get job-ready and safety-aware. Streamlining onboarding processes saves industry valuable time and money. In service to safety, Alliance is committed to making sure that Louisiana workers go home safe.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Burstett. I'm the managing member of the Bradley Murchison Kelly and Shea Law Firm here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We're really excited to introduce you all to this great slate of panelists and the very compelling subject matter of the state of energy in the energy state, Louisiana, and carbon capture. As we like to say, and we're proud to do here, if it's upstream, midstream, or downstream, we got you covered.
Thank you, Alliance Safety Council and Bradley Murchison Law, for the incredible support. Now let's begin our 2024 Louisiana Energy Outlook. Joining us for today's panel discussion are Regina Davis, who has managed ExxonMobil's Baton Rouge refinery since September 2023. The chemical engineer joined ExxonMobil at Chalmette Refining as a process contact engineer in 1999, progressing in leadership roles there and at the Beaumont refinery until 2017, when she relocated to Edmonton, Alberta. Lee Stockwell is Shell's general manager of U.S. carbon capture and storage, shaping the nationwide development of one of the premier technologies for the ongoing transition to energy sustainability. The LSU and Tulane University graduate has a bachelor's degree in petroleum engineering and an MBA. He has been with Shell since 2001, working as a leader in exploration and production in the Gulf of Mexico. And Brad Ives, director of the LSU Institute for Energy Innovation, where he coordinates LSU's R&D, service, and outreach efforts related to the energy transition. He has a long history working with traditional oil and gas companies on emerging energy technologies. Regina, Lee, and Brad, welcome. Let's get started. What do you expect to be the key energy market trends in Louisiana through 2050? Regina, let's start with you.
First, I can say it's going to be very dynamic, a lot of change that's happening. And maybe I'll start by talking about globally what's going to happen and then what that means to Louisiana. So on a global scale, we expect to see our population increase from where it is today at 8 billion people to 10 billion. So that additional 2 billion of population will come with an increased demand for energy. We also will see that there are a number of nations that are still developing that need more access to reliable, affordable energy. And so again, we will see an increase in demand kind of globally for energy as we go out to 2050. If we think about what that means domestically, it's a little bit of a different picture. So for developed nations like the US, we are seeing more energy efficient processes. So if we think about our vehicles, they're more energy efficient, or maybe they're even using different energy sources like electricity. And so actually domestically, we will see a decrease in demand for transportation fuels. Now, what does that all mean for Louisiana? In addition to those changes in demands, where although the world is growing, there is more efficient processes, there's also a desire and really a demand from society to have reduced emissions, to have a lower carbon footprint. And so when you put all of that together and you look out to 2050, and what does that mean for Louisiana? Number one, positive, is that it means that there's going to be lots of great opportunities for us here. But it does mean that we're going to start to see a shift in what we're producing, what types of energies we're producing. We're still going to need to produce transportation fuels and some of the traditional things that we come to know and use day in, day out, our gasoline and diesel. But we are going to see a reduced demand. We're going to see, though, that we're going to start to have maybe energy sources that are produced from biofuels or from renewables, like canola oil or soy oil or even used cooking oil. We'll also see that we're going to be reducing our emissions on the back end. And so things like carbon capture and sequestration is going to increase. And then even hydrogen as a fuel source is going to be something I think that we'll continue to see emerge. And so, maybe to sum it up is that we'll see some kind of gives and takes. We'll see some aspects of our energy demand dropping off, but then that being replaced by lower carbon footprint, lower emissions energy sources to ultimately continue to provide what the world needs to make sure that we're maintaining our modern life as we know it.
Oh, that's a great question. I think we're going to see a lot of change, and having a crystal ball at this point is really difficult. I know that Regina and Lee are going to talk a lot about traditional oil and gas, so let me focus on some other areas. I think the biggest trend is going to be towards electrification of everything that we can possibly electrify. So then you have to ask the question, where is that electricity going to come from? And it needs to be zero emission electricity. Solar plus battery storage is going to be a huge part of that. I think we're all hopeful that small modular nuclear reactors come along and contribute. I think that's a sector that's going to take probably another 8 to 10 years to develop. There's also an enormous potential for offshore wind in Louisiana, but we've got to figure out how to make that hurricane resistant. And I mean, category 5 hurricane resistant. So there are a lot of challenges there. I think we're a solid, again, 8 to 10 years off from seeing that develop. In other sectors, I expect hydrogen to be a major factor. The question is, can we get it cheap enough, fast enough? So there's going to be a lot of work done on that. Carbon sequestration is something that the Institute for Energy Innovation is very focused on, and that's going to be a thing that can enable sticking with natural gas for electric generation. It also can help a number of other thermal applications that we have here in Louisiana. So I expect that carbon sequestration is going to play a major role, and really in the immediate future, that's going to be one of the technologies that develops very fast. I also think that sustainable aviation fuels and other biofuels will be a big trend. We're going to have to decarbonize the aviation industry, and having plant-based fuels is going to be a key. So biomass, I expect to see some big developments using bagasse from sugar processing from sugarcane, and also woody biomass. And there may be some purpose-grown crops like soybeans or others that come along that are really good. So we're going to see, very much an all of the above approach to 2050 with lots of things going on, and we'll ride the winners. We'll see which of these horses are faster and go after those, and that's where I can see industry and government putting the money.
I guess there are a couple of things to think about when it comes to that span of time. The first is where we are today, which is in a place where we're trying to understand this nascent energy transition market. What is going to work from a business model's perspective? What is going to be the next several years of what regulation looks like with an administration change, with understanding what Louisiana and the federal government have done with regards to their own state and federal policies. So you're seeing a bunch of companies kind of shift into this energy transition market and really understand what viable businesses they can create and move forward. So I think what you see in the near term is really adapting to what's on the books, things like the early stages of renewable fuels with low carbon fuel standards and credits, tax credits that come through IRA and other things. So you're seeing this early kind of marketing positioning, and it's a bit slow as we kind of work our way towards understanding what that looks like. And over the longer term, as you move towards 2050, I think very clearly with a growing population, we still see energy and demand increase over a global scale. And the question is kind of what percentages will different types of energy play within that mix is something I think many different sources have guessed at. But ultimately, there's going to be a lot of everything required from that position. So what we're trying to do is understand how do we support both the electrification, and I think that will broadly be a trend that continues of how do we move into that direction while understanding how we create cleaner hydrocarbon use, how we understand the ability to push things like solar and wind at pace. So really want to understand kind of the broader market because all of those things have to increase as the population continues to grow, and especially unlock some of the developing areas on the globe. Your lowest cost, your highest impact energy will still come from the hydrocarbon places, and that will unlock opportunities for developing areas. So that's kind of my expectation. In the short term, we'll see a real understanding of what the markets are that are directly in front of us and how to bridge the short to the medium term. And the longer term, how do we get cleaner and more energy while it being affordable to a globe?
A lot of transformation going on there. Thank you for that overview. What is the next big breakthrough you expect to see in energy production or storage in Louisiana?
That's a really good question. I think the technology around CCS has been around for over 40 years. It's something that isn't necessarily an energy breakthrough, but on a regular basis, what we continue to see is innovation around that front. So in my pool specifically, what I like to see is the continued maturation of what's called direct air capture, which I think is a technology that we see quite a few emerging companies, even the bigger companies, working on this technology that will enable to pull carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere. And if we can do that in a way that is less energy intensive, in a way that's cheap enough to be able to offer that kind of across the sectors as a public opportunity, then you see a real step change in what we would call negative offsets, or offsets to current emissions, where most of what we do in carbon capture and sequestration is taking CO2 out of industrial processes. This is when you take it directly out of the atmosphere. And so if that's something that can work, then we get much faster step change towards meeting the Paris Accord. So that's a technology breakthrough I'm very interested in. I think maybe one that's slightly outside of my area are more of the synthetic fuels, like sustainable aviation fuel and others that, in the areas where it's going to be very difficult for you to electrify, how do we take the major steps forward to enable travel, to enable our lives on a day-to-day basis? I think that is another one that I certainly want to continue to keep a close eye on.
One that I've really got my eye on is geothermal. As people who work in the oil and gas industry know, once we drill down around 5,000 or more feet here in Louisiana, we're seeing temperatures that are hot enough to boil water. There are some technologies coming along that could take advantage of depleted wells. So I think that's something we could see at a small scale for geothermal. There's also some really interesting developments at larger scale geothermal. There's a company, Fervo Energy, that's working in Nevada using fracking techniques to put two wells in a horizontal drill and frack between them to push water down one well and get steam back up the other. I think that's a technology that could be really surprising here. Obviously, we're going to see lots of work on carbon sequestration, and I think we've got a great idea of how that needs to be done, but there'll be some marginal breakthroughs there that will enable that. I think a lot of that will be around leak detection, and also with how we do imaging and analysis of the pore space underneath the ground, and that we'll get better at that. I'm hoping for some exciting developments around hydrogen. I think we've got to figure out how to get the cost of production of hydrogen down, especially green hydrogen. So that's going to be a key. And then offshore wind, I think we're going to see some materials and techniques that come along that enable us to build offshore wind turbines that are going to be hurricane resistant, which is going to be a huge issue for us here in the Gulf of Mexico, but really worldwide. And Louisiana can develop a big export industry if we could solve that one. So those are a couple of the key themes I see.
What are the major trends in refining technology specifically that will shape the future of the industry? And secondarily, what impact do you foresee the energy transition having on refinery operations in the next 5 years or beyond?
Yeah, that's again, a very dynamic one. Look, my whole career has been in refining. So 26 years with the company, and that's kind of been my bread and butter. And I'm watching real time as things are evolving and changing. And so when I look out to the future, I think there's 3 things that I would say we're going to see specifically for refining operations that's going to change. Number one is that our fuel sources, or our feed sources to produce our products, are going to change. We're still going to rely on some of our traditional oils, like fossil fuel oils, but I think we're going to see a growing increase of some of those things that I mentioned before: renewables, co-processing. So whether that's using things like canola oil, or using things like soy oil, or even use cooking oil to process, to still make the same products, but just make them from a different source. So I think that's going to be one thing we'll see. We're also going to see that when we think about refining operations, really manufacturing, it is a hard to decarbonize sector. I mean, it's very intensive, energy intensive. And so I think the way that we process will also change. And so what I would predict, or what things look like, is that hydrogen will also be one of our fuel sources. And with hydrogen, that gives us a unique opportunity to reduce our carbon footprint. Right. And so I think we're going to see changing from some of our traditional fuel sources to hydrogen. And doing that, to create that demand for hydrogen, you're going to likely see an increase in using natural gas to then convert that to hydrogen and basically CO2, and then that CO2 being captured. And then I think that's the third thing, that again, from a refining operations, I think we're going to see that, hey, we are hard to decarbonize. How can you decarbonize, our manufacturing sector? Using CCS, carbon capture, is one of the areas that I think we'll continue to see evolving, and that will have a direct impact on refinery operations. So I think we will still have the footprint we have. It will just be different from the front end, that we'll start seeing more different types of feeds from that processing, where we'll have different type using hydrogen for fuel versus some of our traditional. And then on the back end, where we're capturing, the CO2.
Do you feel Louisiana is positioned to compete with Texas and other states for investment and projects in some of these sectors in the near future? And if not, what needs to happen to improve that dynamic?
Louisiana is already competing. I think you see a lot of projects that have announced different milestones in the span of the last few years, from renewable fuels to carbon capture and sequestration. You're seeing a lot of players step into the space, I think, wholeheartedly. So I think you do see some of that. I think the money that's behind the sustainable growth is one that will continue to look at Louisiana, because the regulations are in place, and you've had a government over the last several years who's been very much committed to the climate transition. John Bell Edwards had a climate task force that put together a roadmap on how it needs to happen for Louisiana, and I think there's quite a bit of buy-in around that roadmap and how we move those pieces forward. So a lot of the legwork that was done beforehand, for instance, the sequestration laws for CCS, have been on the books since 2009. And while we continue to improve those as we move forward, there's already kind of legislation in place that makes it kind of clear how we're going to continue to progress it. Louisiana is one of the first out of the gates to ask for primacy around Class 6, which is our CO2 injection laws. So we see Louisiana already in the forefront. There's always more that can be done from that perspective. Anytime that we can ensure that we've got regulatory certainty, the speed around how we do permitting, those are things that, for example, would help us continue to move forward. I do think there's a whole educational campaign that Louisiana has to continue to go on, because understanding how to transition the economy that Louisiana leans on today and is well positioned to be the leader in for tomorrow, but there is a space there where we have to educate the general populace on what that actually takes, because things like carbon capture sequestration or things like changing to a renewable fuels front, solar and wind, all of those things actually take a lot of effort from the public to accept it, to move it forward. And I think that's still one place that many states are struggling with right now, is just a general education around what it takes to do some of these things and the acceptance on a societal basis.
So true. How is the geopolitical landscape influencing energy investments in Louisiana?
Well, lately it's been really positive. We've had the Infrastructure Act, Build Back Better, the Inflation Reduction Act have caused lots and lots of federal money to pour into Louisiana. And a lot of that's structured as tax credits. So that's bringing private capital with it as well. I think that's what's driving a lot of activity in carbon sequestration. It's driving a lot of what we're seeing around hydrogen development, direct air capture for carbon dioxide as well is something that's really benefiting from that. Obviously, we've got an election coming up. Hard to predict where that will go, but I think what we saw before with the first Trump administration, that industry is going to find a way to keep the programs it likes. And industry's got a major motivation, which is an acronym that people here are going to start hearing a lot of, CBAM. It's the European Union is putting in a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And it's basically a tariff measuring the carbon intensity of things that are sold into the EU. And some of the early targets in this, one of them is fertilizer, another steel, a lot of bulk commodities. Eventually, I expect this to be applied to everything that's imported into the EU. But for Louisiana, having this on fertilizer is a real key. That's why you're seeing projects for blue and green ammonia being announced to figure out how to make ammonia that can be used for fertilizer in a way that's as low carbon as possible. I think it's going to be something you see across the chemical industry that's going to cause them to want to decarbonize their operations by electrifying everything they can at chemical plants, but then also longer term looking at feedstocks that are alternatives and not hydrocarbon feedstocks, so plant-based feedstocks, so that they can deal with this. So that's the biggest geopolitical trend that I see coming, and it'll be very interesting to watch and see where all of this goes.
Absolutely. In your role, you're really on the cutting edge of new technology and findings. Can you provide examples of LSU's current research that could have a significant impact on Louisiana's energy future in the coming years? And also, what partnerships is LSU forging with traditional energy companies to foster innovation in sustainable energy?
Let me take the second part of that first. People may not be familiar with the Institute for Energy Innovation, but we're a result of partnerships between LSU and industry. Shell gave an anchor gift of $25 million to start the Institute 2 years ago. Exxon and Entergy both are putting money into the Institute, and we're seeking additional partnerships, financial ones, but we also reach out to industry to get knowledge, to understand what the problems are that they need to have solved. So we've now hosted 2 what we call Industry LSU Energy Innovation Workshops. We're going to have another one coming up this fall. And that's how we decide on the projects that we back here at the Institute. And these projects in our first round of funding, which happened in October of 23, our projects were evenly split between the solar area and carbon sequestration. We're actually just about to announce our second round of projects, and these are going to be spread a lot more widely across a number of energy areas. But the things that I see that are really promising are in the solar area, we've got a unique facility here on campus at LSU. It's called an open jet hurricane simulator, and we can test different materials and building techniques. So we've been using that to look at solar farms. How do the racking systems, what angle do you have to have on the panels there to be best suited to withstand hurricane strength winds? What happens with rooftop solar? So that's an area that we've been working in. We expect to do more of that around wind turbine blades. We can test those in this facility as well. Carbon sequestration, we're looking at ways to do it safely. And that means you need to have ways to monitor it. We're seeing some really interesting breakthroughs with downhole sensing using fiber optics. We've got a grant there. We're doing a lot around basically underground, building 3D maps using existing oil and gas well log data, and also well log data from drinking water wells. So I think this is going to be really important. We're looking at if the hydrogen market really takes off, how do we identify places where we can store that safely? So that's another project that we've got going. We're looking at the safety of the techniques used to actually capture carbon out of a exhaust flume at a power plant or oil and gas or chemical plant. So looking at things like that, we're also looking at some of the social science impacts of this. How do we structure fee payments to communities and landowners that are going to be fair and compensate them for hosting carbon sequestration sites, other things like that. So we've got lots of work going on. We'll be bringing industry in here in about a month to come up with the next round of ideas. And we have no shortage of things to look at and areas to examine.
Are we seeing a resurgence in interest in oil and gas, both offshore and on land? And do you see that trend having longevity? And then is that any kind of sign that there may be some disconnect between corporate environmental goals in terms of renewables and the reality of economics?
I do think that there is there's going to be a continuing role for hydrocarbons to play over the course of the coming decades. And so the ability for us to work through and extract that hydrocarbon from the ground and process it and bring it into people's lives, not just through the lens of energy, but through products as well. I mean, 95% of the things you come into contact with on a day-to-day basis have some form of hydrocarbon in them. It is a part of our life. So I don't think we're going to be stepping away from it anytime soon. I think the question around, does it signal a disconnect in trends? Well, truth of the matter is that someone has to pay for this energy transition, and the ability for companies like ours to do just that. So to extract hydrocarbon to create a product that people need on a day-to-day basis, and which actually then funds the energy transition. Shell, for example, we're spending $20 billion within essentially a decade's time frame in low carbon solutions, right? And that's the front end to build all of the products that we would need on a go forward basis, but it takes a lot of funding to be able to do that. And so we have the necessity to say, I'm going to create that funding stream coming from somewhere, so that we can move from where we were to where we need to be. So I don't think it's necessarily a disconnect. I think there's a conversation around understanding that hydrocarbons will be in our lives for some way, shape, or form for a period, and we're working to make them cleaner and more responsible on a day-to-day basis. And then how do we fund the direction that we need to go? Because if we don't fund that, we won't make any steps. So it's kind of making sure that we can continue to do that.
This may duplicate some of that, but I'm going to go ahead and ask this question. How are traditional energy companies adapting to environmental pressures and demands for sustainability? And how do you, as you were talking about earlier, how do you balance the immediate economic needs tied to fossil fuels with a long-term shift towards sustainability?
So I do think that they're very much interrelated. It's almost inextricable at this point in time, right? For companies like ours, who have a very heavy commitment around the 2050 goals of what net zero looks like, the ability for us to both fund it with traditional revenue streams today and still dedicate the resources and time and work with governments and policymakers to enable a future that will allow us to do this in a way that would be profitable in the long term, is kind of the crux of the whole situation. So we spend a significant amount of our time and money right now setting ourselves up to be successful in the future. And people like myself and our company spend a lot of time externally working with policymakers in a lot of different places in order to open the channels of conversation and say, well, this is what actually needs to happen, both from a fiscal policy, but also a safety component, right? What is the right environmental policy? How do we make sure this is done? Because the truth of the matter is that we want to make sure that what we're doing is very safe and environmentally sound, and we need to make sure that all of those different considerations are kept in place while we make this transition. So for us, having the ability to continue to produce the traditional revenue streams allows us to fund our opportunities on a go forward basis. And then we are continuing to work with the external environment to create it in such a way that makes sure that, business lines like mine within Shell are successful longer term.
Let's discuss the impact of federal incentives on the state's energy market. So given that some alternative forms of energy development are being quote unquote propped up by government subsidies, do you feel they are sustainable in the long term? Which are and which aren't, and why or why not?
I'll maybe just talk about this a little bit broadly. Number one, I would say that we support practical solutions, practical policies that really consider kind of the world's growing need for reliable and affordable energy. So it has to be there. We need to incentivize investments, especially when we're talking about, innovation where it's groundbreaking. We're going to need some incentives to start that process. So that I think we definitely support. But what we know is that that's not sustainable, because we know how dynamic governments are and how quickly administrations can change and how quickly things can change. And so I would say from a company perspective, especially where we're focused on some of these new innovations in this space, we are really looking at the market. We want a market-driven business. And so I think there's a place for government policy. There's no doubt for that. But from a sustainability perspective, we really have to have a market-driven economy that is really helping to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our customers. So I think it's a little bit of both, but we can't rely on really the government policies will help with the innovation, but really as far as sustainability, we need the market-driven solutions.
I'd love to tackle, one early myth, which is around solar energy. That's a market where, if you think of, what's the purpose of government and new energy markets, and a lot of these tax incentives that we've got for things like the 45Q for carbon sequestration, 45V for hydrogen production, the idea is for government to put money into these areas so that we can get to the scale where they're affordable. And this has really happened in the solar and wind space. Solar and wind now are the cheapest ways to produce electricity. There are numerous studies on this, and solar in particular has been, very, very effective. The Inflation Reduction Act money that's going to incent solar and wind is actually to accelerate it. But if you took those subsidies away today, solar and onshore wind would still be the cheapest ways to produce power in the U.S., and that's cheaper than natural gas and combined cycle plants. And I think that's not something that's widely known. So those are markets that are ready to stand on their own. The carbon sequestration market, we really need to have government involved in that to get it going. Again, once we get it going and see where the markets go, that should be something that can stand on its own over time. And those markets also will depend on the development of private markets for carbon credits, because like the direct air capture carbon credit program, we've got two companies here, Heirloom and Climeworks in Louisiana, working on projects that are receiving federal money. And they need that federal money to get those projects going. But once they've proven out their techniques and gotten it to scale, I believe the private markets for carbon credits will sustain those enterprises, and we'll see the government money slowly being eliminated from that. And hopefully we'll see that in the carbon markets, and we'll see that in the non-direct air capture carbon sequestration as well.
I want to shift for a minute to workforce. How is the state addressing the challenge of modernizing its workforce to meet the demands of a changing energy landscape? And how can the energy industry in general attract younger talent?
I'm going to probably speak more to what we're doing kind of within industry, but also partner with the state. I think this is critical that we were really intentional with how we develop the workforce for the future. And that's all the way from thinking about, college, university, as well as trades. We need it all, especially with the innovation that's required, especially with the amount of construction that's coming our way. In Louisiana in particular, we're poised to be able to capitalize on all of the transitions that are happening, but we need the workforce behind it. So I think this is all the way through. When you think about the workforce development, you got to start early. So that K-8 timeframe, exposing young people to STEM mentoring, to STEM, to careers in STEM, whether we're talking about going through a traditional university process or through trades, you need to have that early exposure. And some of the things that I have seen the state doing is really funding and giving grants for things that will expose young people to STEM. Matter of fact, I participated in something that was fantastic, a STEM Fest, just a couple of weeks ago that was, again, a grant from the state to start this. And then it's looking for industry to come by and keep it sustained, right? And so kind of goes back to what I was mentioning on some of those partnerships, get things going with the state, but needing industry to keep it going. Specifically within ExxonMobil, we have a lot of things that we do from a mentoring perspective with K-8. But then when we move on from K-8 and think about high school, that's where you really can make an impact on where are these young people going? Can we keep them in Louisiana? How do we cultivate the talent for the future? And so there's a couple things that I would highlight that we're doing within ExxonMobil that I'm super proud of, and I know that they're making an impact. One, we have a high school internship program, and that is it's one that I've never seen before, because we're taking high school students and bringing them inside the facilities for a real internship. A lot of times we think about internships being, when you're in your collegiate or university studies, but this is actually in high school, and it's giving them that early opportunity to put their hands and their minds kind of into play and get a sense of what it will look like. And so that was something we had to figure out. How do you keep, all those students safe in a facility? And we've been able to do it, and it has continued to grow. So I think that's been one great way of helping the pipeline. The other thing I would highlight is that we actually have a program called NBRIDI, the North Baton Rouge Industrial Training Initiative. It's been in place since 2012. It's ExxonMobil kind of led collaboration between industry, contractors, as well as Baton Rouge Community College. And what we're doing there is providing no cost, fast track training in the trades: electrical, millwright, welding, pipe fitting, instrumentation, and process technology to basically uplift the community. So these are individuals who might be in, maybe a traditional retail or maybe a lower paying role, but we're exposing them, training them, and they are actually making their way into the workforce. And so I think, those are the things that we have to do. And then probably our hallmark is our engagement with universities. So specifically for where we sit here in ExxonMobil and even some of our other, some of the other industries here in Louisiana, we have two fantastic flagship universities with Southern University and LSU. And so the partnership that we have with both being able to engage and recruit students, as well as the research and just the community engagement is significant. And so I think, there's a whole lot that industry can do. What I would say, though, you can't do it alone. And so it's definitely the partnership, as you mentioned in your question. You need the state support. You also need industry to be all in, and you need those various entities, whether we're talking about high schools or colleges, that also view these partnerships as being our opportunity to really develop the workforce for the future.
I will say that what I see is a lot of transferable skills with regards to the way that we're shifting into the energy transition, as we've had conversations with everyone from LSU. So Shell had gifted LSU a significant amount of money for the LSU Institute for Energy Innovation. One of the main pillars there is workforce development. And as we've had conversations with them and with Southern University and with a lot of the community colleges and even some of the workforce development programs, what we see is this is very much within their headlights. It's not that far out on the horizon of how do we give people the awareness to be able to shift their skills. If you're a welder, you can be a welder in many different forms and fashions. But truly, from an energy transition, it takes all types. It's not just the work that would be on a mechanical completion of a facility. It's the legal environment. It is the policy. It is the educational side. It is the logistics. It is really kind of a whole encompassing of almost every sector of the workforce that Louisiana has, kind of shifting its mindset to, well, how do I move these things forward? So the ability for us to educate broadly, what does this look like? Because I still think that there's a significant portion of the population that thinks about climate change and they think about only solar power. And there's actually a lot there behind that, and it'll sustain a lot of different jobs going forward. So we have to start by educating the public, and then we need to have the right types of educational opportunities. We know that, for example, LSU has one of the first certifications in CCS as far as a degree is concerned. So they're creating these degrees that will give people the ability to step into these new business lines and have a career. And I think that we see very well, but it needs to continue, right? There's a lot of work that's required in order to create that. The second question you asked around how to attract the youth, and I have the opportunity to speak at a lot of different places and with a lot of different aged folks. I do think that one of the things that has to come through wholeheartedly with the younger generations is fundamentally the purpose that goes with this, right? I think more and more we are going to work with the idea of saying it's not just about a paycheck, it's about a purpose, and really helping folks understand how what they're doing really does connect to a better planet and better livelihood for people on a long-term basis is something that can inspire folks to really lean into this. But without the educational side of saying, this is really what it is. This is not, as so often is portrayed, this is not a cleaning up of a dirty industry. No, it's fundamentally changing the way people live on a day-to-day basis. It's unlocking opportunity. It's unlocking lifestyle for billions of people across the globe. And that is something that I think is truly inspirational. So we have to translate that down to kind of the younger generations through the school that we have, through programs that we have. And I think that will start to make a difference.
Speaking of purpose, carbon capture is your area of expertise and focus. Talk to us about the current status of Shell's carbon capture projects in Louisiana and beyond, and how is Shell planning to scale that technology across its U.S. operations? And if you could touch on Louisiana as well there.
Maybe just to state that Shell has been a part of the two global permanent sequestration projects for quite some time. We operate one in Canada that's been online for almost 9 years and has put away 9 million tons of CO2 safely over that course of time. So something that we're very proud of. We've had a lot of experience in. and something that we are leveraging for an experience across the globe. This is how we develop projects. We've had a lot of people go visit Quest, which I think is always a fun thing to show people. This is actually what it looks like on the ground, right? This is the machinery that goes with it. This is how the operation works, which I think is really eye-opening for many. For us, we have a global portfolio of CCS projects with kind of a primary focus in the places where the regulation is most mature, which is probably not a surprise. So Northwestern Europe, the US and Canada tend to be the places that we're starting the most heavily. And then we've got a whole span of opportunities that are a little bit further back in the growth funnel, waiting for some of the regulation to come along. How do we create the market around the laws? So we help them to develop the laws, and then we can begin to move some of those projects forward. Within Louisiana, we have a footprint of assets that Shell operates here, and the CCS project that we've got here is really intended to service both the decarbonization of that footprint of assets that we have here, as well as some third-party customers who also need decarbonization. And that's something we've been working on for a few years. We have our CO2 injection permits that have been filed, and we are working with the Louisiana Department of Energy and Natural Resources to move those forward. And it's an exciting time to be in that space. But it's been a few years in that. It takes a little while to get one of these projects going, and something that we intend to see through in the next few years, with hopefully the first CO2 going in the ground in 2027 or 2028. So exciting times as far as that. In Canada, we actually FID'd a second CO2 CCS project. So that happened in June. Very excited around that. And that the first injection for that will come into 2028 as well. So in North America, we're moving things. We have some other projects that are a little early to probably speak in depth about, but very excited about the couple of big ones that we have that are more mature and that are moving forward. We're also a part of the Northern Lights project in the North Sea, which saw its FID not that long ago and is getting near mechanical completion there in Norway. And there's another phase of that behind it. And we've got a couple of other projects in the Netherlands and in the UK that are working there that are also exciting. So it's actually a fairly full hopper of opportunities that are moving through. And I think in Louisiana, we see other opportunities. We are looking at the hydrogen world and how we can supply hydrogen. And for us as a CO2 project, of course, we could take the CO2 off of the hydrogen creation so that it's clean hydrogen. And so we see a lot of opportunities like that, and renewable fuels and others, all in Louisiana, kind of leaning into places that we have strength in. But it's a really nice integrated portfolio look in a place that is obviously very special to us from an operating environment.
What technological advancements are necessary to make carbon capture more commercially viable across the board?
It's going to be a combination of a few big things and a lot of little things. The efficiency of carbon capture itself is going to have to improve. We don't yet have a way to capture 100% of carbon dioxide coming out of a waste stream from a plant, depending on the type of materials that are burned and the type of carbon capture that's used. We're looking at rates in the 90+% area. So we need to do some things that can make that more efficient. And also, as I talked about earlier, we've got to do a lot of things around the safety of this. What are leak detection technologies? Here at LSU, we've got some findings about how to spot carbon dioxide leaks using temperature. And this looks like it's going to be really, really effective and a very inexpensive way to do it. So things like that are going to be the key. I think we've also got to do a lot with how we cap old wells. A lot of the depleted wells and the orphan wells are going to be challenges for this industry. So how do we make sure that we've sealed those? How do we make sure we identify them? What type of testing techniques do you need for a potential site to figure that out? So lots of work around that. I also see we need some technologies around how we handle the power grid. We've got to have a more efficient power grid. We're going to have to expand the power grid. So I think you're going to see some improvements in like the type of software we use to manage the grid. How can we bring on renewable resources that are intermittent and dispatch those on a timely basis? So that's going to be a good area for research and product development as well.
Now that the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources has primacy over permitting Class 6 wells, and I know that hasn't been going on for a long time, but does it seem as though things are progressing as they should in the CCS realm?
My expectation is that it will be moving in the directions that it needs to. I think in early days, the department has its hands full trying to understand all of the projects. My understanding is there's something like 27 projects and 50 something wells that have been permitted. So they're working with all of those. And for example, the permitting process is not a simple process. So when Shell handed in its permits, it was 47 3-ring binders of material, right? It's a lot of material. It takes a lot of work to submit one of these permits. So if you can imagine sitting on the other side of that and receiving all of this information and trying to sort through what does it mean and having all the meetings and discussions and getting into all the details, you could imagine that it takes both the right expertise and the right quantity of that expertise. And I think LDE&R is at the point now where they're gathering that expertise. They're trying to figure out the processes that they've got, and we're starting to see it move again. Whereas it took a little while for them to get up that initial kind of resource hurdle to be able to do that. So I do expect it to start sooner. And I have a lot of faith in the LDE&R. I know this is not an easy transition project when you take over something like this. So, kudos to them for the efforts that they've made to start really moving this thing forward.
As we wrap up, are there any other insights that you'd like to share with our viewers?
The educational piece of kind of this cultural shift that we have to go through, I think, really is a part of, or should be a part of all of our responsibilities. And so my hope is as your viewers see this, they have the opportunity to really help educate other people, to have conversations, even if you just incite a bit of curiosity. That goes a long way for the process of having people say, oh, well, this should be important. Let me understand some more about it. And I think that will go a tremendous distance to creating additional momentum, right? Because if you think about where we are today, if I just use the CCS business, versus where we need to be from the Paris Climate Accords, you have to grow this business by 100 to 150 times, right? It is a massive amount of change that we have. And a lot of that comes down to how everyone sees this and it leans into it in some form or fashion.
One of the things that I have been pretty excited about over the last few years is this idea of the and equation, right? So there is a need to continue providing in a responsible way the products that make modern life happen. I mean, all the way from the transportation fuels to the things that we may take for granted, like our milk jugs or plastics or even our cell phones, and the modern operating facility. All of those things happen because of actually from our traditional processes. And we know we need to continue to provide that to society, to the world. But we got to do it in a more sustainable way. And so that's the and part of the equation is we can do that while we're innovating to identify ways to decarbonize. And so whether that's carbon capture and sequestration, whether that's changing our fuel sources or our feed sources, whether that's using hydrogen. I mean, there's so much the opportunity that's out there, and I'm really proud of being part of what I think is going to be the future and where we can still make modern life happen in a sustainable way. So exciting times. And in particular for Louisiana, we are just well positioned to capitalize on meeting the global need as well as kind of our local needs.
I think going back to this theme of not thinking that this is a zero-sum game, this is really Louisiana's opportunity. I think we haven't seen economic opportunity like this perhaps ever in the history of the state. The amount of money that's coming in here is in the tens of billions of dollars. It's probably going to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars before we're done. It can be transformative for the whole state. So instead of thinking, how do we protect a traditional industry and why do we have to change? We need to find a way as a state, as a society, as leaders here to embrace this and realize that it's an opportunity to create lots more jobs in Louisiana, the types of jobs that are going to attract people from outside the state to come here because they are cutting edge, while at the same time, we're not going to be walking away from our traditional industries. We're going to find ways to decarbonize those and keep them going and do it in a way that is better for the environment, it's better for the people of Louisiana, and I think leads for growth for everyone and should create a lot of wealth here and a lot of jobs.
Regina, Lee, Brad, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights with us today. It's been extremely informative. And thank you to our sponsors, Alliance Safety Council and Bradley Murchison Law, for their generous support. Without them, this experience would not be possible. We appreciate you, our viewers, for tuning in today. Please send us your feedback at editor@1012industryreport.com. A recording of this webcast is now available on the Baton Rouge Business Report and 1012 Industry Report websites. On behalf of our director, Tim Coles, and I, have a great day.